A lot of ice. A great deal of very cold sea. Some ice looking, well, at least as pure as driven snow. Some looking decidedly second-hand. Land, too, vast areas of land. Much of that land weighed down by a great ice sheet. Islands in these cold seas, some green and friendly, like this one. Others rocky, almost entirely lacking in vegetation, but bursting with their own forms of life. North, south, where? The Arctic or the Antarctic? The answer is both. Each so similar and yet each so different. Whoever invented the phrase poles apart implied a great deal more than mere geographical separation. For a start, can you swear which of these animals belongs to the Antarctic and which to the Arctic? First for the Antarctic and subantarctic. Subantarctic means within the cold water but outside the Antarctic Circle. Penguins are exclusively southern, so is the wandering albatross. Albatrosses need the constant winds that blow in far southern latitudes. Elephant seals are the giants of subantarctic islands. Petrels abound in the far south. This is the giant petrel, almost as big as the smaller species of albatrosses. The fiercely predatory leopard seal is exclusively a southern member of the seal family. Go north now, where the auk family replaces the penguins and fills much the same niche. These are guillemots. In the North Pacific, they're called murres. No elephant seals in far northern waters. The heavyweights of the Arctic are the walruses. Both north and south have sea lions, but the biggest of the tribe, Steller's sea lion, belongs only in the north. Now we come to the easy part. All the land mammals belong to the far north. Polar bears live exclusively on Arctic ice and tundra. Brown and grizzly bears belong to the Arctic and subarctic. Arctic fox, no prizes for guessing where that lives. Wolves. Practically everyone correctly places them in the northern latitudes. And the animals the wolves prey on. The barren ground caribou still represents one of the largest concentrations of a single species on Earth. Just what makes the fauna and flora of North and South so completely different? Take away the ice, and the North Pole sits on water, though vast areas of land in North America, Russia, Scandinavia, and Greenland lie within the Arctic Circle. In the Antarctic, it's quite the reverse. Melt the ice, and a huge mountainous continent lies revealed, practically all within the Antarctic Circle. Land is a far poorer conserver of heat than seawater, and so the Antarctic is an even more hostile place than the far north. We are going to take a look at the short combined season of spring and summer as it occurs, poles apart. The scenery is typical of the mountainous Antarctic peninsula that juts northwards for 1,000 miles towards Cape Horn. Spring is comparatively mild there, although almost the only plants are lichens and mosses. There are only 3 flowering plants in the whole of Antarctica. This is only partly due to cold. Conditions of wind and frost are so brutal that no fertile soil ever gets a chance to accumulate. The Antarctic has 8 times as much ice as the Arctic. These vast tabular bergs, sometimes 50 miles long, are typical products of the Antarctic ice sheet. As the ice moves slowly out to sea, it breaks off. In the far south, the only predators live in the sea. To be accurate, killer whales aren't by any means exclusive to the southern oceans. but in these regions they rank as leading predator. They're large and powerful enough to take any of the 5 species of Antarctic seals. They sometimes hunt in packs or pods of up to 40 strong, and have even been known to attack other whales. None of the 5 Antarctic seal species competes with the others for food. These are crab-eaters, who feed mainly on krill and squid, not crabs. There are fur seals in both the north and far south. These southern fur seals keep well clear of the pack and the coastal ice, where their luxuriant coats would be a disadvantage. They breed on the more northerly islands of the sub-Antarctic. Elephant seals breed on every sub-Antarctic island that has room for them, and penetrate into the Antarctic itself. They're the heavyweights of the seal tribe. A fully grown male can scale 4 tons. This young male, perhaps 3 tons. He hasn't yet grown the full nasal trunk that gives the species its name. Weddell seals belong to continental Antarctica. They're rather sluggish, gentle creatures who feed mainly on squid. They spend a good deal of their time in winter under the ice to escape the coldest weather and strongest winds. They keep a breathing hole open by rasping the ice with their teeth. They're clumsy movers on land, though a little snow makes progress easier. Those are Gentoo penguins in the background. Because of the upwelling of minerals from the deeps, the cold Antarctic seas are 4 times as productive as other oceans. In summer, they yield more vegetable matter than the best farmed land, and more animal protein than the best managed pasture. Much of this protein is in the form of a shrimp-like creature called krill. A great deal of Antarctica's wildlife depends directly or indirectly on krill. Antarctica's most striking animals are its birds, and penguins the most striking of all. Like all Antarctic birds, they're highly specialized. This continent boasts only 43 species of birds, an incredibly small number, of which only 5 make their living on land. To begin with, there are 7 species of penguins. These are chinstraps. Now for one of the 5 birds whose livelihood is earned ashore. The sheathbill, a scavenger which lives off its wits and off other birds close to the tide line. Here it's feeding on a dead Adelie penguin. There are 24 species of petrels, and this is certainly the most beautiful one. The snow petrel is as pure white as its name. The brilliance of its plumage is offset by that little black eye. The snow petrel nests in cracks among the crags. At the southern end of its nesting range, the giant petrel is often almost pure white. That powerful bill can tear open the carcass of an elephant seal or penguin. On top are the tubes common to all petrels. They play a part in getting rid of unwanted salt acquired in a life spent mainly at sea. Their plumage tends to get darker the further north they go. Some of the birds that nest in the Falklands, for instance, are nearly black. The constant pattern of circumpolar winds in the Southern Ocean particularly favors the soaring flight of the larger petrels. Deception, one of the starkest and most dramatic of the islands at the tip of the Antarctic Peninsula. It's a caldera, a collapsed volcano, still active in parts. It's called Deception because from far off there doesn't seem to be any entrance to the crater which forms the anchorage. Deception is one of the islands where possibly the most striking of all the petrel's nests. It's the Pintado, which means painted petrel. The old-time whalers called them Cape Pigeons, because they began to see them skimming in parties over the waves as they sailed south from Cape Horn or Cape of Good Hope for the Antarctic whaling grounds. The bare lava cliffs of Deception Island provide them with ideal nesting ledges. As with all Antarctic birds, a little snow doesn't discourage them from early egg-laying. You could argue that as far as birds are concerned, the Arctic and the Antarctic present much the same problems. But there's one difference between the two polar regions which hasn't been mentioned yet. As far as the future is concerned, it's the most vital difference of all. Until 1943, there was no permanent occupation of Antarctica. Today, Britain and 10 other nations maintain long-term scientific bases there. The fifth largest continent in the world is run completely internationally. Men from many nations study there for strictly scientific purposes under a treaty that comes up for review in 1991. After that, no one knows. The Antarctic is certainly rich in the minerals that all nations want. So far, they're securely locked away under a mile or so of ice. But there's no telling that things will stay that way. After the treaty runs out, Antarctica may yet be up for grabs. A lot of grabbing has been done there in the past. These bones are reminders of the slaughter over many years of vast numbers of the Antarctic whales. Already, Russian ships are harvesting the krill, which once supported a huge population of whales and on which the seals and penguins still feed. There may be oil offshore. What happens then to the last unspoiled wilderness on Earth if drilling starts? Soon, the darkness of the Antarctic winter will set in. These days, men stay at the bases, and it's the nesting birds that have to leave for the friendlier ocean. 10,000 miles to the north, in the Arctic, the days are lengthening. And that's where we must go now to compare what happens in springtime, poles apart. Springtime on Middleton Island in the cold Bay of Alaska. What a difference from the subantarctic islands. Springtime in Arctic regions is accompanied by a burst of wildflowers. If you could melt the North Polar ice cap, you'd find nothing underneath but sea. Ocean is a far better conserver of the sun's warmth than land. So the vast territories that lie within and just outside the Arctic Circle benefit from this warmth. Though they do become desperately cold in winter, they are never quite as cold as their southern counterparts. When spring comes to the Arctic regions, it releases running streams. A scene like this could only occur in the gradually unfreezing north during the spring breakup. It's the McConnell River flowing into Hudson Bay. The benign influence of the sea makes itself felt on the McConnell's ice, even though the tundra through which the river flows is frozen solid. Only the surface melts in springtime. In the Antarctic, you'll never see dirty brown pack ice like this. There are no large rivers to carry the rock and debris of the land out to sea. This ice has the words "Far North" written all over it. It's drifted down the Yukon River and is now busy depositing little bits of Canada and Alaska on the bed of the Bering Sea. The soil which the ice carries is another key difference between far north and far south. There's little soil in the Antarctic. The peaty earth of the Arctic's tundra may not be rich, but it is at least true brown soil. It supports vegetation, and the vegetation supports wildlife. In early spring, millions of birds migrate to the tundra to nest. Great flocks of geese like these lesser snow geese. Tundra covers 1/10 of the world's land surface. 5 million square miles of frozen plain that separates the sea and ice of the North Polar regions from the tree line further south. The tundra is really a desert. It gets only about 8 inches of rain or snow a year. The water that seems to lie everywhere on its surface in summer is the result of the top few inches of the permafrost melting. A foot down, the earth is still frozen solid. The tundra is unique to the countries ranged around the North Pole, and the Antarctic has nothing like it. The tundra vegetation provides food and nesting cover for the migrating birds like this golden plover, as well as for residents like the willow ptarmigan. This is the cock ptarmigan. He keeps his white winter plumage much longer than his mate to attract predators away from the nest. That's the hen ptarmigan. And here's her mate. The animal of the North American tundra is this handsome member of the deer tribe, the barren ground caribou. A feature of both polar regions is that they support many fewer species in temperate or tropical zones. But the successful species, such as penguins, seals and caribou, exist in vast numbers. There are still at least 500,000 caribou grazing on the tundra of Canada and Alaska. Their European counterpart is the reindeer. The biggest and most impressive of all the northern herbivores is this strange creature, the muskox. It was once far more widely distributed. The ice ages drove it as far south as Kentucky. In quite recent times, it lived in large numbers in all the lands of the Arctic Circle. Then, in the last century, it was hunted almost to extinction for its meat and its coat. It was easy to kill because of its habit of forming a defensive circle around the young and allowing the hunters to pick them off one by one. The muskox is magnificently adapted to life in bitter cold. That long, straggly hair provides one of the best insulated winter coats in the entire animal kingdom. Musk oxen are now confined to North America and Greenland, though recent successful transplants have been made in Spitsbergen and Norway, as well as Nunivak Island in the Bering Sea off Alaska. It will be a great triumph if their numbers increase. They're as much part of the far north as the caribou. And where mammals exist, then there's scope for mammal predators. This is one of the smaller hunters, the Arctic fox. It's said that this is the only Arctic animal you could introduce to the Antarctic with complete success. A polar bear needs 3 things: sea, pack ice, and seals to hunt. But of course, such an introduction would be disastrous. The bear would do all right, but the penguin colonies most certainly wouldn't. Brown bears and grizzlies are the #1 resident predators of the North American Arctic. They're great opportunists. They'll eat almost anything from meat to berries. Wolves were once common throughout the Arctic Circle. Now they've been hunted almost out of existence. This she-wolf has raised her cubs in a den close to one of the caribou migration routes. She depends on the caribou. To some extent, they depend on her to weed out the sickly animals and poor breeding stock. When it comes to sea mammals, North and South have far more in common, and they've been persecuted by man in much the same way. If the fur seals of the Pribilof Islands in the cold northern Bering Sea appear to be applauding, they've good reason to do so. By 1913, when they were at last protected, they'd nearly been hunted to extinction. Now they're up to full strength again. What they're really doing is cooling themselves. Their only breeding grounds are on the Pribilof Islands. They were thus an ideal target for the sealers of the last century. Their pelts provided the skins most sought after for coats. It would be nice if you could say the same about the marine mammals hauled out on this remote island in subarctic waters. In less than a century, the walrus population of the North Atlantic and Pacific has been reduced from perhaps 500,000 animals to around 70,000. Walruses breed on the pack ice, but in spring come ashore. These are all bulls on this beach and become a sitting target. Hunting them must have been a bit like shooting old gentlemen in bath chairs. The hunters killed them for oil and for their valuable ivory tusks. They've got protection now, except from the Eskimos who have always traditionally hunted the walrus. The coastal Eskimos have no real need to hunt walrus anymore, but they're unwilling to give up their ancient way of life, and the wildlife authorities of America and Canada are unwilling to take it away from them. But whereas they once hunted with a harpoon, they now use repeating rifles. The harpoon had a line attached. If the walrus sank, it could be recovered. Now, when a walrus is shot, it often sinks, so meat, blubber, and ivory are wasted. The trouble here is that conservation has got mixed up with politics. Such a thing couldn't happen in the Antarctic, thanks to the international treaty that protects all wildlife there. There's one fascinating similarity between the birds of North and South. These are not penguins, though they look very similar on the water. They're guillemots, members of the auk family. In the north, the auks play almost exactly the same role that penguins do in the south, diving and flying underwater to catch small fish. The difference is that they can also fly in air. See them standing upright on the cliffs of a breeding colony shared here with kittiwakes, and they look even more like penguins. But no penguin ever had flight feathers like this. It's just one more example of what scientists call convergent evolution. Unrelated animals in different parts of the world evolving a similar appearance because their needs are much the same. Just as there are many species of penguin in the south, there are many species of auks in the north. There's a horned puffin. These dandies are tufted puffins, all auks, all what you might call the penguins of the north, but with the added advantage that they can fly. North and south, the penguins and the auks happen to be very similar. So do the seals and sea lions. But where one living creature is concerned, there is one tremendous difference. Human influence in the Arctic has mainly been confined to Eskimos and Indian subsistence hunters. Now, man is there, opening up the north with his new technology. With supertankers and the Alaska pipeline and its terminal at Valdez. They may be poles apart, but the natural wonders of both ends of the earth are extremely vulnerable.